Welcome to OOD Works, the podcast, a show about unique individuals and the services provided by Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, the state agency that helps individuals with disabilities find a job and be more independent. Here's your host, Kim Jump.
Today I'm joined with Director Miller and also DODD, that's the Department of Developmental Disabilities Director, Jeff Davis. So it's great to have you both join the podcast today.
Good to be with Director Davis.
Thank you.
How long have the two of you known each other?
Well,
I think Kevin was 8 when we first met.
and I think
that was
Jeff was like 12 because he's only a little bit older than me. So we've known each other going on about 10 years, I'd say, 10 years. So.
Mm-hmm.
You bet.
Yeah, Director Davis, we certainly were around the big previous administrations and working in various capacities. Director Davis, I know when you were at the Department of Developmental Disabilities in previous capacities, and I was with the Department of Youth Services, and so we ran in some of the same circles, but it wasn't really until probably about 2010, 2011 that we formally met when Director Davis was the head of OPRA, the Ohio Provider Resource Association. Is that right, Jeff?
Well, I worked there. No, I think that's right, Director. I think it is when you first came on board at OOD and we had a chance to interact, and I had an immediate chance to be impressed, and I think that affection just continued. So,
folks in the community sometimes confuse our two agencies, do they not?
I imagine so.
It never happens. Never.
We confuse ourselves.
So, Director Davis, for our listeners who maybe they're not as familiar with the Department of Developmental Disabilities, could you just explain the work that's done there?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So we are fortunate in Ohio in a sense that we have a separate state agency that governs service and supports to individuals with developmental disabilities. And so we are, in that sense, sort of in large measure, with one of the exceptions we're going to talk about today, but we are in large measure sort of a self-contained system under the department's authority, so to speak, right? Funding, regulatory, policy, all those kind of things. And so the system entails, really, in some ways, it's very much birth to death through early intervention. You take a little hiatus, perhaps during school age, not always, but perhaps, and then you move into adulthood. So it is a sort of enlarged family.
Mm-hmm. And so it's services and supports specifically for individuals with developmental disabilities, right, and that could impact all different aspects of life. Whereas we focus on work, DODD really focuses on the whole picture.
Yeah, that's correct.
How do you see the efforts and the missions of the two agencies coming together and complementing the work that's done?
Director Davis and I both have a passion for individuals with disabilities. And so when you start with that premise and you have that dictate, for a large part of our professional career, and having personal effects to that mission, you tend to realize that it's so much more than just a job. It's so much more than a policy. It's a passion, so you live it. You don't just work it, you live it. Director Davis is always keen on saying, and I think at this point in time, it's so true that, be kind. In the developmental disability system, you need to be kind. Well, that also goes for individuals that we serve who are blind and those who are deaf and those who have mobility issues. In this day and age right now where we're dealing with so much social awareness and injustice, I've talked about how our systems are dealing with individuals with disabilities who've been marginalized since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. And so if there's anybody who has, maybe for lack of a better word, maybe a little bit more understanding of what it means to be marginalized and treated differently as we celebrate 30 years of the ADA, it would be our two agencies and how we can be leaders, hopefully. And it's not just us, meaning everybody who's an advocate about what it really means to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm. I think that's on point.
What if the services look like there at DODD during coronavirus?
Well, we're not terribly different, are we, unfortunately, than the community at large. And so, when the virus hit to a point where we all fully understood it, we tended to lock down. I mean, that's my term, but we tended to, right? People stayed at home. If they were with families, they stayed with their families. If they were getting residential services of whatever type through our system, they stayed home. And perhaps they were used to going to work, or they were going and doing something during the day. So that stopped in large measure almost completely. And the same pressures, but just added on to every family out there that has experienced the virus. It's been hard. The reality is it's difficult on everybody. It's certainly difficult on individuals who are used to community interaction and being with their friends and working and whatever it might be. And it's also hard on staff, direct care staff. So, people say often it must be really difficult, the challenges that I'm facing, Director Miller, whatever, but the reality is it's much harder on the ground. And after a while, the fatigue happens. There are not a lot of people coming through the door for jobs. You've got to keep your staff motivated, but that everyday fatigue, we're asking them to mask up and to wash and do some of these basics. I am so empathetic at the moment and wishing that we could do more and more for what's happening on the ground. But the upside to that is we're seeing some remarkable effort out there. We truly are. You can't say enough about it. As children have stayed home, as they stay home during perhaps parts of the school year, if you've had family members aging, whatever the dynamic is of the individual family, we've had direct support staff that have had to make those hard decisions. I've got a mother that needs support at home. I've got children I've got to provide daycare for, so to speak, during the day. Perhaps my mother got the virus. I mean, it's just any or my husband became unemployed. I mean, you think of the dynamics. There are a lot of hard decisions to make, and sometimes the decision is I can't work any longer. Sometimes it is, honestly, and we've seen this. Sometimes they actually have sort of foregone their family, not left them, but just and said, I want to stay with this individual because I know that he or she really needs my help. And what do you say to that other than, a standing ovation? I love you. Thank you. People are doing it and we're surviving, but it's a challenge.
So I want to be able to help plug if we have a listener who is out there, is interested in becoming a direct service provider or knows of someone who is there one place they can go to get started with the application process?
You have your mechanisms like Indeed and things like that. They work, and you can find DSP or direct support professional. I believe you can find it in Ohio Means Jobs. There is a website called DSP Ohio. You can look there, and actually is ready-made, specifically made for this purpose to help you find work. That's nice of you to bring it up. It is rewarding work. And many that have done it, and many of the leaders in our system and throughout started as DSPs. They started there. They understand its value. It's intrinsically rewarding, but it is, it can have its own challenges too.
Right.
I feel bad. I've shut Director Miller out. Did we do that by intent?
This is good stuff.
So, Director Miller, tell our listeners, what is Employment First?
Well, Employment First is, in our world, it's a partnership really between OOD and DODD, but it's something bigger than that. It's really about saying individuals with developmental disabilities, employment should be the first option that we talk about. Systemic standpoint, for many decades, and I know Director Davis will agree with me on this, and it's something we deal with our counselors when we have usually initial conversations with parents, at age 14, when we're talking about opening up a case for them about what type of career they would want. Traditionally, it was always thought of as someone with a developmental disability. The first question is, how do I get them on Social Security? How do I make sure I have some sort of financial support for this individual? And I understand that when you consider going back to after, even before World War II, but especially after World War II, where there was a heavier emphasis on industrialization and it was very progressive thinking at the time to talk about, well, let's have individuals with disabilities be employed, but they won't be with everybody else. They'll be more excluded. They'll have, separate but equal. I think we all know that doesn't really work when we look at our social history. And so really Employment First is about saying, how do we make sure that individuals with disabilities, how do we operate from an attitude that integrated employment should be the first option that we talk about? When I say that, I also understand, and Director Davis, I'm sure, does as well, we understand that employment is not 100% possibility for 100% of the individuals with developmental disabilities. That would be unrealistic. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes when you start talking about these policies, it becomes very passionate because, I've had an opportunity to explain to two different governors, when they say, I don't understand how this gets so, passionate. And I said, and I'm sure, Director, I'll ask you what your thoughts are on this, but, I've been in a room with parents and providers and so forth where every single person said, every single person with a disability, no matter what developmental disability, can work in the community. And I've been in another room with just as many people who will say with passion, there isn't anybody with a developmental disability in a shuttle workshop or in this location or has this that could work out in the community. So you usually have extremes, and most of that is based out of fear, in my opinion. People are afraid of either not wanting, their loved one to be included the way they should be, or, hey, they need to be treated different because they're fragile, or I'm worried about their well-being. And so Employment First is really more than anything about that attitude of saying, we want to make sure that resources are dedicated to helping individuals find jobs. We understand, like we said, this isn't something where it's 100% foolproof. It's more about culturally changing the attitudes of everyone involved, whether that be parents, providers, county systems, VR, DODD. It's about saying we can move in this direction. And our numbers reflect that. I mean, I think you've seen since the partnership began back in 2014, we've seen like a 78% increase in the amount of DD eligible individuals who are served by Voc Rehab. And we've had some great success in placing those individuals, and they've done great. And anyone who's listened to me talk, I talk about all the metrics and the research that talks about individuals with disabilities who work have greater independence. Their life expectancy is longer, and they have greater purchasing power, and they feel more successful in life. And that's not just Kevin Miller saying that. That's Brookings, and Cornell did a study on that. So there's several studies about the social effects that work has. So I think that's been something that is obviously something we want to tap. But Employment First is something where we don't say we're done. This is something that's ongoing. And so this partnership where Director Davis provides funding to us that we match, he basically, for lack of a better word, purchases counselors that carry Employment First caseloads, and they direct the work. It's directed by, even though we oversee it and the counselors have to do that work by federal law, basically Director Davis has purchased counselors to work with individuals in his system. And it's been not only, I always say it hasn't been successful, and take our word for it. To me, one of the best ways to show is when you see other people replicating it. It was just a couple years ago, Minnesota came in and they met with members of staff with DODD and OOD, and they went back and developed a law, and that's actually called the Ohio model. So it's great when you see another state using Ohio as an example of what they want to do.
Absolutely.
I think with the tone that you have set at OOD, and then was set, really that working relationship then, increases your opportunity to make it work on the ground. And I think it is. It's proven itself. I mean, there perhaps are more, Director Mill, but I really think that's the key, right? It is the counselor that's on the ground, and it's the focus at the effort. Back to basics.
As agency partners, we understand we're coming together. It's not an OOD person. It's not a DODD person. And let's be honest, it even goes beyond our two systems. Education is involved in this. Jobs and Family Services usually is involved in this. County boards are involved in this. All of those folks and all of those systems have to understand also we have to be outcome focused. We have to be able to show that we want to get done what this person wants to get done. If that's what they really desire to do, and they've chosen that work is what they want to do, we should do everything we can to make that happen for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to work through, terminologies that are different. Director Davis approached me last year and said, what I think would really be important is if we could get some of our case managers, and Director Davis, I'm probably saying the wrong word, and our counselors together for some joint training. I said, hey, I think that's a great idea. And Director Davis championed that and said, it's more about there's things that we are, if we're person-centered, then we're on the same page. But that's hard. We got to be able to work back and forth and get out of the way of saying, well, this is the way we do it, or this is the way we do it. Am I correct, Director?
Oh, as always, I think you're spot on. When you have large structured systems in government or other places, you can offer options sometimes, right? Okay, I've got a residential option and I'll break it into, this component and this component. When we think about, our system, we have had workshops and we have had adult day service outside of that, and we've had competitive employment. But you still can kind of get stuck sometimes in those options, right? Mm-hmm. And that you always have to be careful about talking about person-centered service, meaning I'm focusing really on the individual, but only really offer some rather high-level options, right? Mm-hmm. If you're really talking about the individual, then you try and tailor your work to that individual. It's not simple. That's not the easiest way to do something. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the hardest. And so I've been very appreciative of the success that this partnership has had, but I think both Director Miller and I know that there's more we can do, and we can get better at focusing on the individual, particularly, in everything that we do, but work too. We can learn to expand options. We're really good at some things, better now because of the partnership, but I think we know they're okay. You're never good enough, right? You've got to talk about things, some of the basic things all the time. And relationships do matter, and how you interact with those that you support matters, and how you interact between agency matters. And so training is a piece of that puzzle. I think it has proven. Sometimes when you cross-train, meaning when I say that, I mean you have everybody in the same room together, you're hearing the same things. When you train separately, we found you might have the same presenter, but you have different conversations, or perhaps you're hearing things differently or whatever it might be. You don't have a chance to interact and play off one another as to what you just heard. Mm-hmm. And that's essential too, right? I'm just among, I just got our DODD, local case managers or SSAs. And so, you have the same conversations, but I don't have a chance to hear what the OOD counselors said. How did they react to that training? I think it is. I think it's proven good, and it's really kind of a model that I think we hope to replicate as often as we can in other ways.
It starts with the fact that, Director Davis and I, we make sure, sometimes we talk even more frequently than this, but we set aside at least once every 2 weeks a set schedule period for us to just touch base. As I always say in relationships, you got to be able to, they're like bank accounts. You got to make sure you're putting some deposits in there. So when you need to make a withdrawal, that it's not one-sided. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where Director Davis and myself, but more importantly, beyond us, the two agencies, this extends out. Stacy Collins, who works at DODD, works very closely with Susan Pugh in our vocational rehabilitation. They're on just about every work group that Director Davis and I are on. There are 2 point people in that programmatic area, Kristen Ballinger, who has background with the Department of Developmental Disabilities, who works at DODD, who works with the employment aspects in the business community. All of those things are important for everyone to be able to have conversations. And really, the most important part is those SSAs and those vocational rehab counselors, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the person-centered planning is done.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to get my assistant to cancel the calls with Director Miller, but she wouldn't do it.
It's because I know his phone number, and as long as he doesn't change his phone number, then I'm in good shape. I think about, especially right now, where as a country, as individual people, we're questioning a lot of things about ourselves. We're questioning, safety protocols, and should we have football seasons, and all these things like that. And, fundamentally, as we are celebrating our 30th anniversary of the ADA, now think about that. That's not very long. That's basically the Civil Rights Act for individuals with disabilities. And I can remember, in 1990, what were some of the arguments against what ADA was all about? I think most people thought it was just about, well, you got to widen door jambs and you got to make sure bathroom stalls are a certain size. It was way more than that. Mm-hmm. And I think that ignorance of not knowing drove a lot of fear. When I think about questions where we say, why is it we do what we do? Why is it important to talk about seeing individuals with developmental disabilities working in the community? I mean, the first thing I always think about, probably, and it's selfish, but is my son, who is on the spectrum, and he's out working and he's going to college. And I know it wasn't too long ago that was something most people would have said, well, I don't think he can do that, without ever knowing any information. Just, it was culturally something that was kind of a given. And it's up to everybody to show, I don't care who you are, where you're from, in our world, especially if you have a disability, we want to do whatever we can to make sure culturally we get the most out of everybody's talent that they can give. It's like I say, we're also not being unrealistic here. It's like I said, look, I wanted to play at Ohio State, and they said, look, there's not a big rush for guys who run 4.9 and a 40 and, are 165 pounds. You got to know what your limitations are, right? And so we're not trying to say, and this sometimes can be controversial, parents, me being one as well, and I think you two are parents, well, sometimes you have those delusions of grandeur, like my kid could do anything. And it's like, if we're really being in the real world, are we doing the things that we need to do to make sure we're not setting them up for failure as well? To say, look, as far as talent can get you, we want to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's not pigeonholing somebody to say you're just doing this. I mean, we've evolved where it was, no, you can't do that kind of work, to the old food, flowers, and filth, which means janitorial, food service, that type of thing, to now where you're seeing stories on 60 Minutes and others where you've got people with developmental disabilities going to school, graduating, working in higher, Google and Amazon and so forth are actively recruiting people because they've seen the benefits they bring to the table, not the deficits. Director?
Well, first, I'm a little skeptical on the 4.940. That might be a little fast, but he might. Other than
now, I'm
that,
talking about when I was 17, Director, not now.
I think other than that, sure. What you said is hard to beat. So I'll just follow with this, Kim. There's an intrinsic, I believe, there's an intrinsic inherent benefit to work that's meaningful for human beings.
Yeah.
At least in our culture, or the culture worldwide that we know today. The fact that when one has that and feels it, and you're a productive employee, that's an immense benefit to the employee and the community at large. Whoever you are, whatever your individual, that in and of itself applies to every human being. When we think about next steps, right, either going into the next budget or, as the director is, I think the director is really, really good at thinking about 3, 5, 10 years out. I mean, we'll have to find ways even through our own partnership to become more efficient.
Right.
And so I know he and I are going to talk about these things going into, our plans for October next July, budget submission in October next July. But I think we can. I think it's inevitable that we've got to get better and better and better, more efficient. The world is going to demand that we're continually more efficient. So I've got some things that I've been thinking, and I'm sure the directors too, and we'll have fun doing it.
So before we wrap up for today, I wanted to ask about what services look like right now in developmental centers. Are staff, individuals there, are they wearing masks?
Yes, staff, right, are required to wear the personal protective equipment. We feel it's made a huge difference. We have, we were touched by the virus up in the northwest part of the state in Toledo early on and took appropriate steps. Where the virus hits, it is, there's trauma involved. It hurts. I mean, it does. It's meaningful in a not so pleasant way. But we have been very successful after that in controlling, both amongst controlling, as in the buy-in that we've had of staff and of families, residents, everybody, right, to understanding what has been required to control the virus. We've been very successful, so I'm a lot of admiration.
How about out in the community with individuals with developmental disabilities? I mean, do you see masks being problematic for this population?
I mean, the majority of folks know. No, most folks can wear masks. There are some that cannot, so we understand that. And the governor's made allowances for that. So if everybody is sensitive and understanding and patient.
What's the visitation situation currently like? Is it all outdoor?
It's all outdoor at the moment.
Okay.
Certainly for our ICFs or developmental centers, yes, outdoor. In our intermediate care facilities, which tend to be our more congregate care facilities, it's outdoor. We're working on very, very specific targeted indoor visitation where you might have a separate space where you're not in living areas at all. There are certain situations where individuals can't go outdoors, or the weather might not permit it, or whatever it might be, and we want to be as accommodating as possible, but mitigate as much risk as we possibly can.
Right. That's just got to be such a challenge right now.
It is. Every day is truly a balancing act.
Wearing masks and trying to be, social distancing, checking on one another. Kim, you probably get sick of. We've come up with a tagline, Director Davis. I know yours is "Be kind." I've come up with one saying, you got to cut some slack. Cut people slack. And I think it's important that you don't have to be a director or a comms chief or an SSA or whatever. This is in everyday life. Our families, who we're working with. It's more than a tagline when Governor DeWine talks about we're in this together. We're all trying to figure out, there's no playbook to this. Director Davis and I and the governor, we're all trying to do what's best for those that we serve. At the end of the day, I've never had to look at myself in the mirror and say I made a decision that compromised individuals with disabilities. Always said, I'll make a decision that's in the best interest for them. And I know Director Davis agrees with that. But sometimes those decisions, especially during a pandemic and what we need to do, there isn't anybody who's going to get out of what we are going through and how we're going to have to progress, as Director Davis has said, in the next 6, 8, 12 months with budget preparation. Everybody's going to feel pain when it comes to this. Everybody's going to have to change the way we at OOD are doing things. And I'm sure Director Davis would say the same thing, right?
Yes.
But we'll get through it ultimately.
We will, and we're committed to the partnership.
Yeah. I have 100% confidence we're going to get through it. We're not going to look the same. I don't think anybody's going to look the same, meaning how we do business, but we will be doing business. It's to your point, those efficiencies, how we do things, that'll modify. But you know what? This is usually where you find the greatest opportunities, because you're kind of like, well, our back's against the wall. Let's do this. And then all of a sudden it opens up, just this conversation, for instance. We're sitting here on a, Zoom call. Who would have thought March 1st of this year, everybody would be working from home, and we're still placing individuals, some 1,500, to work. And who would have thought we could be doing that, or clearing cases, and Director Davis being able to help people in the developmental centers still do this during a pandemic. So it's forced us to be more creative and innovative, and that will just continue.
Individuals that want to learn more about Employment First can check out the partnership site at ohioemploymentfirst.org. I know, Director Davis, they can also learn more about your department at dodd.ohio.gov. Parting thoughts?
Other than a thank you. It was very nice.
This is a calling when you're helping individuals with disabilities. And so just hats off to the staff, both at DODD and OOD.
A transcript of today's episode is available at ood.ohio.gov/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. We're on social media at Ohio OOD. Do you have a disability? Do you want a job? We can help. oodworks.com.